All right, so thank you for joining us today for the webinar on CNL's Nuclear Power Demonstration Closure Project. Today's topic is a fun fact or fiction. So first, I would like to acknowledge that the NPD site is located on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. As an organization, Canadian Nuclear Laboratories recognizes and appreciates the Indigenous peoples' connection to these places. CNL also recognizes the contribution of First Nation, Métis, and Inuit and other Indigenous peoples have made both in shaping and strengthening the communities where these projects are situated and to this country as a whole. So today's webinar will include a presentation and then we'll open the floor for a Q&A and discussion period. Before we get into the fact or fiction webinar, I'll go over a few housekeeping details and then I'll introduce Katie who will kick off the presentation. So there is simultaneous interpretation for the webinar today. You can access the session in French and English through the globe icon on the bottom right of your bar on Zoom. So select the language you'd like to hear, and please note there is a slight lag in the translation. So be patient and wait for the full translation to come through before asking where it is. So today's session is planned for about 1 hour. We anticipate the presentation will take about 20 to 30 minutes, and the rest of the time will be a Q&A. Please use the Q&A icon to submit your questions at any point during the presentation, and we'll respond to all the questions during the Q&A. If there are any we can't get to or we need to follow up on, we will follow up in writing to all participants on the webinar today. Note, we will be recording these sessions and posting them on our YouTube channel, usually about a week after the webinar. So stay tuned for that. If you have any issues or would like to chat further outside this technical this webinar, please get in touch with us at ermstakeholder@cnl.ca. Our team is watching the inbox and will continue to monitor it if there are any follow-up questions. So during the webinar, we want you to participate today and try and guess if the information is a fact or if it's fiction. So we'll be launching a couple of polls throughout, so please feel free to participate with us. Following the webinar, we are going to be sending out a bit of a longer survey. It's about 10 questions, shouldn't take you that long to complete. And we're trying to evaluate our webinars and continue to improve them and bring you topics that are of interest. So we'd really appreciate it if you could take the time following the webinars to complete that survey. So without further ado, I will introduce our first speaker, Katie Shorter. She's the director of the NPD Closure Project.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining in for the NPD webinar today. Rachel mentioned already we're doing fact or fiction. I think these are really fun, and I hope that you'll take time to participate using the polls. So I think the next slide really helps us outline some of the webinars we've already done. So covered a wide range of topics, and all of these webinars are available on CNL's YouTube page. So I think at the last webinar, we had some questions, poll questions at the end, reaching out to participants. Maybe some of you were on the last webinar, but participants to understand what topics they'd like to hear about. And so as at least a starting point for that, we've used that feedback to put together some fact or fiction questions for today. So I'm on today, but I'm going to pass it off to the rest of the NPD team. So I think you'll see some other faces. So today we have Graham Porter, who's our safety analyst. I'm thinking he's waving maybe and smiling. We also have Sophia on. Sophia is our environmental analyst. And we have Courtney, and Courtney is a decommissioning and remediation specialist. So I'm going to pop into the background here and pass it off to the rest of the team. And I hope it's enjoyable for all you listening today, this bit of fact or fiction about NPD.
Thanks, Katie.
Okay, perfect. Graham's there.
Yeah, sorry, I was waiting for something to happen anyway. Okay, let's get into some of these fact and fiction things. As Katie says, they should be a bit of fun. Nothing too serious, hopefully, this morning. So let's dive right in and see where we go. So let's start off with an easy one. Fact or fiction? First one is not only did NPD generate electricity from nuclear power for the first time in Canada, but it was also the training area for nuclear engineers. So give you a second or so to think about that, but is it fact or fiction? Okay, shall we move on and see whether it's what the actual answer is? It's actually a fact. So in back in 1962, NPD made history in Canada, and it generated electricity from nuclear power for the first time. Funnily enough, it was June the 4th, 1962, which was this 62 years this month, and full power was achieved actually 62 years ago this week on June the 28th, where we achieved a power generation of 20 megawatts electric. So we operated until 1987, and we had a successful 25 years of operation, where we actually trained a great deal of great number of the operators in Canada who went on to operate things at the CANDU plants, such as at Darlington, Bruce, Pickering, that kind of places. So NPD was basically the proof of concept prototype for the later CANDU designs. And when it did close in 1987, it had exceeded its operational goals. So definitely a fact there. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Fact or fiction? The in situ disposal method is unsafe. So again, I'll give you a few seconds to think about this one and see what you think. Play along at home, as they say. Okay, it's definitely fiction. We wouldn't do anything that's unsafe. So the NPD facility has a number of features that ensure ISD is safe. These features are what make the ISD choice the safest option for the disposal of the facility. So these things are like the main NPD reactor components are located below ground and built into the rock of the Canadian Shield. Removing the reactor structure would be difficult and presents a higher risk to workers, and it's better to leave it in place. The in situ method reduced many of the risks to people in the environment that are associated with taking out the radioactive materials and transporting them to another location, which would only be for temporary storage, because there's no current place to dispose of any this type of waste in Canada at the moment. Excuse me. Also, the facility structure is safely encapsulated or contained below grade, which limits long-term risks in the cases of both normal and extreme natural and man-made events. So it's definitely a safe option to choose. Okay. So move on to our next one. Fact or fiction? The facility will be filled with regular concrete. And just for a change with this one, we're going to have a bit of audience participation. So if you still want to select on here, would you think it's fact or fiction? Oh, okay. There we go. 3% of you think that's, oh, sorry, 12% of you think that's a fact. 88% of you think that's fiction. So in the case of this, it is definitely fiction because we will not be filling it with regular concrete. CNL has developed specially formulated grout based on the unique requirements of the NPD facility and has conducted extensive research on the use of grout in similar circumstances. It has also conducted a test program using locally sourced materials that verify that the grout formula requirements can be met. The tests included fresh and cured properties, and such as the ability of the grout to flow around pipe in the tanks as required. We've also looked at scale-up testing on these ones to look at bulk properties, such as things as how well it would flow into the facility and its ability to effectively fill the underground structure. So combined with the existing robust structure, which is quite significant quantities of concrete walls and things in place. The proposed grouting process will enhance protection of people and the environment. And if you want to know more about this, you can read it in our environmental impact statement in section 4.3, which will give more details on the grout and its formulations if anyone's really interested. Okay, let's move to the next one. We're going to go another bit more audience participation on this one again. So we'll have a poll in a second. So CNL has planned for the worst case scenarios, like tornadoes, to ensure the safety of people and the environment for many generations to come. So what does everyone think on this one? Fact or fiction? Well, that's good to see. 95% of you said it's fact. So in reality, the actual answer is that this is a fact. So we've actually done a lot of analysis to see how things such as catastrophic events, things that could happen, such as earthquakes that might occur once every 10,000 years, but in fact, we've actually gone out to 1 in 50,000 years now. We looked at the effects of these things, and we still show that we're meeting the acceptance criteria for all these events. So we looked at other things such as tornadoes, extreme weather events, and we've done lots of modeling. So in evaluating the safety of the project, the predictive models have been run, and there's a wide variety of scenarios been done. They look out for thousands of years to understand the likely impacts, potential impacts, and the relative importance of various features of the facility and the overall safety. So we've also looked at a number of disruptive events, so things, especially in the long term, so things such as site investigation, where people deliberately dig into the facility, floods and erosion events, extreme degradation of the facility, fault zone activation, which is again a type of seismic event we're looking at here. Even things such as extreme as someone deciding they're going to dig up the facility and build a farm on the rubble that's been removed. So there's been a lot of analysis done looking into the extreme events that could occur. So, okay, I think it's probably a good time to hand over to Sophia, and she'll go run you through a few more fact or fiction events. So thank you, Sophia.
Thanks, Graham. So the next fact or fiction is little is known about the current radiological inventory in the facility. Okay, so this is fiction. So neutron flux modeling using modern three-dimensional codes and libraries combined with physical sampling was undertaken to ensure that the inventory of the reactor has been appropriately accounted for. So CNL has completed a full building characterization, including all nuclear systems to verify the total radiological inventory. So since the reactor contains most of the remaining radiological inventory because the fuel was removed in 1988, the completion of this additional analysis allowed CNL to compare field sampling measurements to models which provided confidence in our radiological inventory. So pictured here is the NPD facility broken down into different characterization units. So the goal of characterization at the NPD facility was to inform the waste inventory and support decommissioning planning for the decommissioning program. So in order to do this, the NPD facility was divided into 3 separate characterization units represented by the colors here. The building was classified into these units based on the likelihood of the rooms or areas being contaminated. The green areas are class 3, which means that there is a potential for contamination. The blue areas are class 2, which means that there is possibly contamination. And the red areas are class 1, which means we already know there is contamination present. This area consists of rooms such as the reactor hall, which allowed access for fuel transfers when the reactor was operational. Based on these units, sampling was approached differently. So the hierarchy changes the quantity and distribution of sampling that is required to achieve the desired confidence objective in each unit. So basically, in a class 1 area where we know there is contamination present, we would complete more radiological surface scans and collect more physical samples than in a class 3 area where there's a lower potential for contamination. So we can go to the next one. Okay, so the next factor, fiction. CNL is protecting the environment at NPD and its surrounding areas. Okay, so this is a fact. The NPD closure project is designed to contain and isolate the contamination, which will protect the surrounding environment. CNL conducts regular monitoring at the NPD site, and the monitoring results continue to demonstrate safe performance and continued environmental protection at the NPD site. Monitoring will continue after the site's closure, and the monitoring results will be posted on CNL's website. CNL has undertaken thorough, detailed modeling of potential releases after the proposed closure to understand how the plan could affect the Ottawa River. The scientific analysis demonstrates that the decommissioning project will protect the Ottawa River with no negative impacts. The final grout design, a comprehensive study of the geology of the site, and a detailed earthquake assessment all contributed to this finding. As well, CNL will continue to have extensive monitoring systems in place and mitigation strategies for worst case scenarios to make sure that the Ottawa River remains protected no matter what. NPD is currently drafting environmental follow-up monitoring plans in order to support monitoring during the project's decommissioning and in institutional control phase. So these plans include effluent monitoring, which monitors parameters that are emitted directly from project activities, such as dust, environmental monitoring, which monitors different components of the environment that may be affected by the project, so like the Ottawa River, and also groundwater monitoring, which has specific requirements on how to develop a groundwater monitoring program. Okay, so we can go to the next one. All right, so fact or fiction, CNL plans to monitor the facility for a long time. I might have alluded to this one in the last. You should have a poll on your screen for this one. Okay, so most of you, 96%, said fact, which is correct. This is a fact. So follow-up monitoring is an important part of decommissioning that the grouted and it's to see that the grouted facility is performing as we would expect. So monitoring at the NPD site has been ongoing before project approval and will continue throughout the two main phases of the project, which is the decommissioning execution phase and the institutional control phase. So the decommissioning execution phase is predicted to be about a 2-year period of active decommissioning activities. The follow-up monitoring will continue throughout the institutional control phase, which is a minimum of 100 years after the facility is grouted, when active monitoring and surveillance will take place. Monitoring will start before we get project approval to get an idea of environmental conditions, and once the project gets going, we will continue to monitor. We can compare monitoring results back to the baseline conditions to see how things are changing. So as I previously mentioned, CNL is drafting proposed follow-up monitoring plans for the decommissioning execution and institutional control phases. The final follow-up monitoring program will be developed incorporating federal reviewer, public, and Indigenous feedback. The proposed follow-up monitoring during demolition and grouting activities will include emission and effluent monitoring, as well as regular chimney swift counts during their seasonal presence at NPD. The proposed follow-up monitoring during the institutional control period will include visual inspections and monitoring the groundwater for parameters that would trigger the need for additional investigation and potential mitigation actions. So recently, CNL revised its monitoring plans to include annual sediment monitoring and monitoring of the species at risk mitigation measures. Currently, we are revising the draft follow-up monitoring plans based on feedback to provide clarity that mitigation measures will be implemented in the event of an exceedance. We plan to continue to gather feedback on the follow-up monitoring plans and work with Indigenous communities to incorporate traditional knowledge and monitoring of key valued components into the follow-up plans. The follow-up monitoring plans will not be finalized until after the CNSC makes their environmental assessment decision for the project. And with that, I'll pass it over to Courtney for the next fact or fiction.
Thank you, Sophia. Fact or fiction? Once the revised draft environmental impact statement is submitted, there will be no more opportunities to provide feedback. Well, this is fiction. CNL expects continued interest in the revised and final EIS from those who have made comments and/or have been following the progress of the environmental assessment for the project. CNL will continue to meet with public and Indigenous nations, communities, and organizations between the resubmission of the revised draft EIS this summer, 2024, and the submission of the final EIS early in 2026. CNL will continue to build these relationships into the future and beyond the completion of the project. The focus will be on the discussion of how feedback has been incorporated into the EIS and how the comments have been dispositioned. So now let's run through a recap of the timeline. So CNL submitted a revised draft EIS in late 2021, responding to the CNSC's guidance and remaining information requests. In January 2022, the CNSC advised CNL that the 2021 draft EIS submission was incomplete. The CNSC acknowledged that CNL had sufficiently addressed 3 of the 7 outstanding information requests. The CNSC indicated that 4 outstanding information requests related to how Indigenous content is reflected in the EIS required more information to proceed with a technical review. Early in 2022, CNL worked to submit a revised draft EIS with information to address the CNSC's feedback from the completeness check. As an outcome of the concerns heard through Indigenous interventions at the hearing for the NSDF project and through the procedural direction issued by the CNSC, CNL opted to postpone the submission of the NPD draft EIS to allow for additional Indigenous input. Therefore, the draft EIS submission is now planned for July 2024. When the final EIS is accepted by the CNSC and the project moves forward with the hearing, there will also be a period to submit interventions, which will be heard and considered by the CNSC. CNL is open and transparent regarding changes to the project and regulatory schedule. CNL will continue to maintain regular communications through correspondence, open houses, community events, technical discussions, the Environmental Stewardship Council, the Community Advisory Panel, webpage content, newsletters, and public webinars to ensure that the public and Indigenous nations, communities, and organizations are kept apprised of the process and the progress for the project's environmental assessment. So that concludes our presentation for this morning. I will now hand it back over to Rachel.
Thanks, everybody. Hey, Margot, can you just go back to the last slide for me, please? I just wanted to make one change, and I do apologize, folks. That should read, CNL will continue to meet with the public and Indigenous nations, communities, and organizations between the resubmission of the revised draft EIS in summer 2024 and the submission of the final EIS in early 2026. I do apologize for the slight error there, and when we update, when we send the the follow-up email to everybody, I can make sure that's corrected in writing for everyone. Okay, sorry, continue on there, Margot. So we will wait a moment for questions to come in. We do have one there already. And in the meantime, I will make a shameless plug again for everybody to take the time following the webinar to complete the survey that will be circulated. So our first question is a comment and a question. So whether or not these issues are fact or fiction is irrelevant, since the ultimate end state is an entombed reactor, otherwise known as a near-surface disposal facility. As such, the site will require site access restrictions in perpetuity. Is the requirement for maintaining the access restrictions and monitoring the site in perpetuity fact or fiction? Katie, I'll pass that one over to you.
Yep, thanks, Rachel, and thanks for the comment and the question. So the access restrictions and monitoring will be in place. That's a fact for as long as necessary. So the site will be licensed through the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, initially, or as it's closed as a waste disposal facility, and it will remain as such under a license until such time as that license is changed. And that would be, at this time, that's known as a license to abandon, that transition from a monitored waste disposal facility to a lesser state at the point that it's safe to do that. So Sophia already covered this. I think it was Sophia, but our monitoring plans have us doing surveillance at the site and monitoring for a minimum of 100 years, but we will not cease that until we are granted approval through the appropriate regulatory body at the time. So it's a fact that we will continue that for as long as necessary. Thanks, Rach. I'm going to jump on and just share a couple other things, because I don't see any other questions popping up yet. So please put them in if you have anything you'd like to ask the team. But what I did want to say is today we really covered things at quite a high level, some of the topics that you're interested in. And Courtney mentioned sort of all the ways we're trying to reach out and be available to answer questions from the public and Indigenous nations. So if there is a topic that you're very interested in that you didn't hear about today, you can always send those through to ermstakeholderrelations.ca. And you can also ask for a quick chat with some of our technical experts if there's a very specific topic you'd like to discuss with the team.
Okay, we have a couple more questions coming in. Thanks for that, though, Katie. Always happy to receive any questions through the inbox. So probably a question for either Katie or Courtney. So why is it taking so long to get the final EIS submitted?
I can jump in on that one. So basically, we want to make sure that we receive as much input as possible on the project. We're working very closely with our Indigenous neighbors, nations, communities, and organizations to really garner input and feedback into what interests and concerns are for their communities, and be able to incorporate that into the project. It's really important to us that we have those established relationships and we work to build those relationships as well. Thank you for the question.
I might just add to Courtney's response. Thanks, Courtney. So part of the reason that the time has gone on is that we've continued to receive feedback from the CNSC for aspects of our submission that need to be improved. So it has to be accepted by the CNSC to continue moving through the process. And we're working very hard to do that. The other aspect is that not only are we hearing feedback, but when there's concerns about the project or topics of interest from the public and from the Indigenous nations, we're working to resolve those concerns. That's also part of the process. And so answering questions on those, helping to build some understanding or some comfort with the project are all things that we're doing before we'll submit our final EIS and move to a hearing.
Thanks, Katie and Courtney. So are any of the grout materials local to the Ottawa Valley? Graham, you want to take that one?
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't find the button to come off. Well, at the moment, we haven't taken many firm decisions about where the materials are coming from. Ideally, we would like to get to as local as possible. We have looked into sourcing as much material, such as sand, but the majority of the material for using for grout will have to come from further afield because it's actually going to consist of mainly like 90% blast furnace slag. So that will probably come from somewhere like southern Ontario, where the steel works and things like that are. So, okay. Thanks, Rachel.
Thanks, Graham. Another one for Katie here. So will CNL be monitoring this stack? So that's the iconic red and white ventilation stack indefinitely to make sure it's safe for the Swifts.
Thanks for that, Rachel. So as many of you know, we keep pretty close eye on the Swifts that use our stack every year. So we are monitoring and we will continue to monitor. And part of the mitigations or the choices by the project is that we will retain that stack even though we're decommissioning the rest of the facility. And the timeline for that is about 50 years. We plan to retain it or until the point where it's sort of unsafe to leave it standing. So we'll be sealing the stack, creating a barrier between it and the rest of the grouted facility. So it will have a concrete sort of plug at the bottom. And we'll be doing regular inspections as part of our surveillance and monitoring to assess the condition of that stack and make repairs as we need to help keep it stable and as a suitable habitat for the swifts as long as we can.
Thanks, Katie. And as just a reminder to everybody, we do host public nights where folks can come and watch the swifts kind of circle around and enter into the site, into the stack. And I saw it for the first time in person this year, and it was pretty cool. So we've already had it this year, but we'll do it again next year. Sorry, pardon me, I had a bit of a brain fart there. We'll do it again next year and invite everybody who would like to come and check that out. Okay, sorry. So how do you think this facility will affect the Pontiac region, its environment, and population? Back to Katie for that one.
Yep, I can definitely take that one. So as part of the long-term modeling and the different scenarios that Graham walked through as he was talking about, how do we know that this is safe? We evaluate what contamination could potentially get into the environment way out into the future as the facility begins to break down. And one of the tools we use there is predicting dose. So how much radioactivity will people receive? So that dose we compare against our own project criteria, but also against the public dose limit for Canadians set by the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. And our projected maximum dose from this project is a tiny fraction of 4 orders of magnitude for the sciencey types below the 0.25 millisieverts per year dose constraint we've set for the project. So what that tells us is there is not radioactivity getting into the environment that will affect either people or the environment around the site. So specifically thinking about the Pontiac, so down the river a bit from us, and on the Quebec side, we have looked at specific receptors that are farther away from the site, and we predict no effect from the project, either during the decommissioning or in the long term once the facility is closed.
Thanks, Katie. Graham, a question coming your way. So you talked about seismic and tornadoes. What about flooding? So this is referring to our fact or fiction about our worst case scenarios.
Yeah, flooding was one of the scenarios we looked at. We looked at quite a lot of things on these things, but things like extremes of weather that involved, say, 100-year rainfall or things like that, we've actually looked at those, and the overall impact again is negligible on the site. So again, we're still, even over flood, changing river levels, things such as multiple failure of dams upstream from the Chalk River at the NPD site. Sorry, we've looked at all those, and again, we still come out as meeting all our acceptance criteria. Thanks, Rachel.
Thanks, Graham. And don't go anywhere because we'll tag you next. So what happened to the fuel from NPD?
Well, after the reactor was shut down, I think it was in '88, we had to wait a little while for it to cool off. It was taken away and safely stored at Chalk River, where it's been there ever since. It's currently there now. It's in a safe state, and it's awaiting an ultimate final disposal, I think, for probably when we get a deep geological disposal repository for it. So I say it's safely stored at Chalk River. That's where it is.
And another question on grout for you, Graham. So are there other decommissioning sites that have decommissioned using this grout?
Not the exact same recipe, but there's been quite a few around the world that have done this. There's a few in the US that have used grout to actually fill in the facility. So, I mean, some of it depends on, as we discussed earlier, about local materials. So, typically, we tend to use, or not, the industry tends to use pozzolanic materials because it's good properties for what we need. So things like blast furnace slag would be used, which is what we're going to use, or you could use fly ash as the other things. So there are other materials as well, but those are typically the two that's normally used. Any more, Rachel?
No, we'll give you a break, Graham. We'll bring Katie back to answer a really interesting question that we got here. So the exploration of alternative decommissioning plans that utilize robotic and advanced technologies offers several significant advantages over traditional methods. How can the integration of robotic and advanced technologies enhance safety, efficiency, and cost effectiveness in decommissioning projects?
Thank you so much for this question. So this is kind of have we thought about other ways to handle NPD? And we certainly have. So as part of the project evaluation, initially we looked at the different alternatives, which included the strategy we've picked, which is in situ disposal, but also a partial dismantling or a full dismantling strategy. The other thing, maybe just to flag here, is that CNL has a team now looking at all of our reactors and how we will decommission them. So dismantle or other options. NPD is in one of the other option categories right now. So as of right now, we're continuing with our project and our plan for in situ disposal, but we're always sort of aware of the other technologies that are out there, and we do have a team at CNL that's specifically looking at how we can handle some of our other reactors belonging to ACL and CNL that need to be decommissioned using some of these new advanced technologies. Rachel, maybe that's a opportunity for an upcoming webinar for that team to share some of the work that they're doing.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. We actually have a webinar coming up next for an update on facilities decommissioning at Chalk River Labs, and I believe there is a little bit of a highlight on some of the really interesting work the group is doing using different techniques. So if anybody would like to tune into that. So another one for you, Katie, before, so follow up to the in perpetuity question. So that was regarding site access. So since CNL is waiting for a decision by the regulator, so that's the CNSC, Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, I take it that CNL has no idea whether the site access will be required in perpetuity. In other words, CNL has not made any contingency plans to address the possibility that the regulator will never grant a license to abandon.
So again, great follow-up question. Atomic Energy of Canada is and will continue to be responsible for Canada's nuclear liability. So they are committed to have site access controls or whatever is required for as long as required by whatever regulations are in place at the time where we might transition to something else. So there is a commitment. We will ensure that necessary controls are in place for as long as necessary.
Thanks, Katie. Some really great questions have been coming in today, and I've already got some ideas for future webinar topics, so that's great. So we have one last question that I think we can address at a high level during our webinar here, and we've got a few more moments, but I do think we're going to follow up in writing to this question as well as any other ones that come in after the webinar. So the question is, why does the International Atomic Energy Agency recommend not using in situ decommissioning?
So again, lots of great questions today, and there are some facts about this topic, I think, available on the CNL webpage. But what I will say is that the International Atomic Energy Agency doesn't want to promote in situ disposal or decommissioning of reactors as the go-to. And that's part of the reason that their guidelines are written the way that they are. And they do acknowledge it as an acceptable solution in an accident scenario, which is not what we're doing here, obviously. We're doing a planned decommissioning. In Canada, our regulations from the CNSC do allow for in situ disposal to be considered, assuming that we can make an adequate safety case. And for facilities that are legacy, like this one, where decommissioning was not planned when they were originally constructed. And that is definitely the case for NPD. I'll just say that in situ is not something we would pick for every single one of our reactor decommissioning projects. But Graham highlighted earlier on some of the key aspects of this facility that make it suitable for this type of disposal option. So the fact that it's buried beneath the ground, the fact that the thick concrete walls are already in place, and that the main radioactivity is locked up in the metal, give us the series of barriers, the important barriers that we need to protect and contain and isolate the radioactivity. And we do have a safety case. It's part of our license amendment with the CNSC that demonstrates that this is a safe way, that we're well below and meeting any dose limits that we need to make sure that this is a safe strategy. So I think Rachel's right. I do want to maybe send a little follow-up with some more details on this specific topic, how we fit within the IAEA guidelines and how we fit within Canada's specific regulations. Thanks, Rach.
Thanks, Katie. And I will note that we had two webinars related to this. If anybody wants to go back and look at or see more detail in a webinar style. So we did a November 2021 webinar on developing the safety case for NPD. And then we also talked about reactor design and in situ disposal in March of 2022. And both of those videos are available in French and English on our YouTube page, and we can include them in our follow-up response. So with that, we've made it through all of the questions. So thank you very much for, to everybody for participating by asking questions and completing the polls during the webinar today. It was nice to have some interaction. So we'll send out the links to the recording and any follow-up shortly after. And in the meantime, if you do have any other questions related to NPD or other topics, please reach out to us at stakeholder@CNL, and we'll help you get the right answers. One more plug for our post-webinar survey. And with that, I think we can wrap it up. Thank you to everybody for taking the time to participate this morning.